Hello and good evening. Welcome to the Business of Property. I am your host, Cheryl Leong from Property Development Australia. How are we doing today, Australia wide and wherever you are in the world? So, in the Business of Property, every week we interview superstar guests in the property development space that share their expertise, their deals, their stories to help empower, build, and grow our community of property developers here. So, hello to Facebook land, LinkedIn, YouTube. Give me a shout out if you're here in the comments below because we're going to be talking about something very, very interesting because it's not actually a concept I've come across before. Today we have a special guest, Warren Livesey from By Airspace, and he's a Strata property development specialist. So I spoke to Warren and he was sharing about what he's doing in the strata space and building pretty much on airspace. And I thought, oh my goodness, the community have to hear about this because I'm really keen to find out a little bit more. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Warren to come on down. Hi, Warren. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you.
Absolutely fantastic to have you here. So Warren, tell us, tell us a bit about your background and how you came to this sort of very niche and very specialist area of strata development because we're not knocking down strata buildings, we're actually
No,
adding
no,
to them.
yeah, exactly. So Warren, yes, the company is called By Airspace. Airspace is ultimately the undeveloped space that's above a building that hasn't yet been developed. It's a term quite widely used in the US and UK and in Europe, but in Australia, it's not really heard of it at all. So
Mm,
yeah, look, where I got into this is by the same way as many other people have done it, and that's I went in and bought my own little apartment going back, I don't know, 15, 16 odd years ago, which was a top floor apartment in Tamarama. And there was just this huge roof space above us that wasn't being used. And you would kind of poke your head up through the little square manhole and just see this atrium of space that was not being used. So I basically tried to convince my neighbors at the time that we needed to fix up the particular building, and how we could potentially do that and fund it is if we kind of subdivided the actual unused space that the building had and put it onto each other's titles. So therefore trying to create value that would then pay for the building upgrade. So yes, that was the first project in Tamarama. I did a second one after that. Same thing, took about 3 or 4 years. I spent about $700,000 in purchasing the apartment. Spent 400 in actually building up into the roof, and ended up selling it for about 2.2 million only about 3 years later. So it's a really good model. And then neighbors started to ask me if I could do a similar thing for them, which I did do. And 75 developments later, speaking to hundreds of lawyers, town councils, you name it, architects, engineers, and really just focusing on strata. So
mm,
that's I
mm.
really came about it from a personal interest in property.
Yeah, and so in my mind, and when you're talking about the airspace, and I'm thinking top floor apartments, I'm always thinking, well, it's a flat roof. But you telling me there's actual sort of an attic type, well, I guess that you'd be looking for buildings that almost have like an attic type space. Is that what we're talking about there?
Absolutely, yeah. So basically, it's any space that hasn't yet been developed, airspace. So it's not developed space. It hasn't been built as yet. It's kind
Mm,
of the rights. So when you actually purchase a house or an apartment or strata block, not only do you own the building, but you actually own all the footprint of that space going up into space to
mm,
a point, obviously, where the government kind of takes over on the 18K mark. So you actually own the development rights of that going up. It's just councils that restrict you from how high and
mm,
how far you can
mm,
actually go. But as they release the kind of the restrictions, you can obviously then build up higher. But Strata is an Australian ownership term. It's not used elsewhere really. It's very common here, but where you ultimately become a percentage owner of an apartment block. You don't actually own your apartment. What you actually
mm,
do is say it's a block of 10, and you buy in there and you 1/10 of an owner of the overall block. And because you're 1/10 owner, you actually have the exclusive use of your particular unit or your apartment. You don't actually own the apartment. The only thing that you really do physically own is the kitchens, bathrooms, and floors. But the roof, the floors, the walls are all common space. So everybody within the block actually owns that. So that's why you actually need everyone's buy-in when you're going to be able to do this. So within the 75 developments, it's generally been going in there where you would have, say, a block of 4 or 6 or 8, and they'd have a roof space. They would traditionally have, say, on the ground floor, they would have the courtyards at the front. They'd have garden space at the back. They might have 2 stairwells, because back in the day, in the 1930s, 40s, they needed 2 stairwells for fire and the likes. So what we would do is we'd actually go through and subdivide all that common area space that hasn't been used. So the roof space may go to the top floor owners. There may be redundant stairwells that can be built into. There could be basements that the ground floor guys actually have. The guys at the front may get the courtyards. The guys at the back may get the garden. So there's kind of an equal kind of share of that common area space.
So we're not just talking the roofs. We're not just talking the roof and all above it. I mean, this is, there's other parts of the building, the existing building, where we're being, we talk a little bit about sustainability. We're actually using existing space in a more, I was going to say, in a better way.
Better use, yes, exactly. Amenities. You're ultimately improving the building. And what actually happens with why I call it buy airspace is because that airspace could be anywhere. It could be in the garden, could be a basement, could be up in the roof. But traditionally, 90% of the time I speak of the roof because that's where the real value is. Because as you can imagine, in the roof, you can go up, you can add a new penthouse apartment, you can add new apartments, you can add new floors. So that's really the kind of the value add that people have. So, I mean, traditionally what would happen is buildings would run out of money, every building, where there's a strata involved, and they try and keep a small amount of money in their kitty, I guess. And every strata has to have a 10-year capital works plan, which basically stipulates that the building needs a certain amount of maintenance. We need to be able to pay towards that maintenance. And that over that 10-year period, it's kind of calculated how much money needs to be put into the kitty each quarter for each owners. But what does traditionally happen is that when the windows and the doors and the heating and the plumbing and the roof leaks all needs to be fixed, there's no money in that sinking fund to do that. So they have to do what they call special levies. And they could be between $50 to $100 to $200,000 per apartment just to do the fire upgrades and change all the windows and the lights. So really what I've been doing in helping apartment owners subdivide that airspace so that when they are putting that $200,000 or $100,000 into the kitty to pay for everything, they actually get some common area space back in return. So they may be an 80 square meter apartment, but if they're on the roof, they may get the top floor of the roof added to their title, which would obviously increase quite considerably. So it's creating value out of thin air is what buying airspace is.
And so is someone paying for that extra ownership of it?
Yeah, so traditionally, what people would do is if there was a block of 8, it would just be those 8 people that would be developing the space, and they would be investing money into the building. They would ultimately be buying that airspace from the other owners so that then they have the exclusive use to build into that particular space moving forward. So yes, their apartment may be $1 million. They may spend $100,000 buying the space. They might build it for $100,000. So over and all, they spent $1.2 million. But the apartment, obviously, now it's a double story potential. There's obviously a large amount of value that's been done there. So really, the new company Buy Airspace, it's different. It's something that hasn't really been done much here in Australia, where traditionally you'd have a block of 8 and only the 8 people would develop that space, right? So the roof guys would go up into the roof and the bottom guys would go down and the likes. But where Buy Airspace is actually where you sell the roof space to a third party. an investor. So an investor comes along and says, "Hi guys, Warren, I'd like to buy 200 square meters of a new development lot somewhere in Bondi. I'm willing to spend $2 million for that particular space." I then go out as like a buyer's agent and find strata buildings that are requiring money to be spent on them, and maybe they don't have sufficient funds in order to do that, and approach them and ask them if they would be open to receiving an offer in order to purchase the airspace, the roof space in their particular block to a third party. Traditionally, the top floor owners would be buying that space from the body corporate for, say, an average of $100,000 to $150,000. That's based on about 100 different valuations they've done over the last 12 years.
Per square meter, is that what you're saying? Yeah.
Yeah, so up between $100,000 to $150,000 for the whole roof space.
Oh,
so
right. Okay.
Yeah, so they don't really pay much. The top floor apartments are really, it's really discounted, should we say. However, you can actually, if you can imagine, if you were to buy the roof space of an apartment block in Bondi and were to build a penthouse apartment on that, you can imagine that you'd be paying anything in the realms of who knows what size, but the 2, 3, 4 million odd dollars for it. So why are the buyer spaces? What we're saying is, of that 2, 3, 4 million dollars for that penthouse, why get the investor to pay the actual owners the $2 million. So instead of getting 200,000 from the owners for that particular roof space, they're getting 2 million, so 10 times the amount of money for that particular roof space, if they obviously are allowed to build up into that space. Therefore, they're in a R3 zone. They are either equal to or can go above the actual roof height line. So it doesn't apply to every apartment block. But as you can imagine, giving 8 owners $2 million in order to buy their roof space, they can now spend $500,000 just to change all the windows and do their fire upgrades and change out the plumbing and do the likes, as well as obviously the sustainability. So all the buildings in the next 100 years have to become climate awareness. There are certain sustainable programs that we have, and we do motivate the owners to take those funds and actually bring the building back up to life. So to make it more sustainable and off the grid.
And then there's I guess there's also for them the added value that they'll bring to their properties, because it's a newer looking property. It's
the beauty of roof spaces, obviously, it's an existing foundations. You're not creating, you're not pouring slabs. It's already there. You have electricity, water, and gas already connected. When building up into the roof, it's lightweight material. So you're generally it's generally timber or wood that's been put up by a carpenter. It's done really, really quickly, really cheaply. I mean, it's ultimately glazing and wood and paneling. And so it's kind of it's not as severe as doing a full development site, because all the groundwork's already been done. And then obviously with the investor purchasing that particular space and they spending that amount of money on the building, then the penthouse is going to be worth so much more, because the owners have spent money fixing all the windows. They've done all the plumbing, the rendering, the parking, the painting, fire upgrades, electrical. So as much as the owner in the roof is actually paying quite a large money apart for that space, that money is being spent to basically uplift his investment in the roof space as well.
I've got so many questions just buzzing in my mind, but I'd love for anyone that's listening, please pop in the comments below any of your questions for Warren, because I think this is such an interesting space. Because again, I'm used to going and negotiating with a whole lot of strata owners, which I'm sure it's like herding cats, right? So what is that? I mean, let's talk about that. What is that process? Because I know with strata, you got to go to the strata committee. There's this, and then everyone's got to approve, and that. Like, what is the mechanics behind that? The general mechanics.
So look, obviously, dealing in the number of years that I've been doing this, I would have maybe 90% of the projects don't even go ahead. And that would be speaking to the owners. They all realize there's a huge amount of money to be made in going up into the roof and going down and around, but they really don't want somebody else to make that money. They want to be the ones to make the money, right? So the ground floor guys normally think that the guys going into the roof are going to make millions, but they're only paying peanuts for the space, and vice versa. The guys with the gardens, they're going to be making a big amount of money. And so you do have a lot of people that have concerns in moving forward, and you do need up to 75% of the owners based on their unit entitlement to actually approve the sale of any particular space to an existing owner or investor. So it's a diplomatic nightmare, really. And what has actually transpired from this is there's been so much infighting amongst the owners because, as you know, you can't choose your neighbours per se. And sometimes the last thing you want to do is go into a financial partnership with them. So it's one thing sharing a front door with someone, but it's another sharing a financial budget with them, because ultimately they have the same amount of own power as yourself. So the new concept with Buy Airspace is actually where you are selling the top floor roof space to a third party provider, and all the funds that are actually made from that are split evenly between all the owners based on the percentage of the building that they own. So everyone makes the same. So the problem that we had beforehand, where owners were going up into the roof and buying that space and the gardens and the like, it's all hypothetical of what that roof space is potentially worth. Because to value it, they would say, okay, what's the future value of your apartment going to be now that it's going up another story and there's 2 bedrooms on it? Then they subtract the present value of that particular apartment. So say they think it's worth 1.5 once it's fixed, and there's a new attic level to the apartment, so 2 levels. Say the apartment is worth $1 million now in order that part. So there's a $500,000 gross profit in that. You obviously then need to subtract all the construction costs, the council costs, and all the consulting costs. So say that was hypothetically $250,000, your end point, or should you say your net profit of that particular development, is $250,000. So then that is generally shared between the top floor owner and the other owners amongst the strata. So that's how they kind of value it within that particular model. But the model that I'm suggesting to everybody is actually selling that whole roof space to a completely third party, someone that's not actually a part of the actual body corporate at the present moment, and getting 10 times the value.
And I guess then that comes down to how do you price it, and your valuers. Do you have specific valuers that you use that understand? I'm assuming.
Absolutely.
There aren't that many people that understand that.
It's like having an ear, nose, and throat specialist. It's just that's all they particularly do. So look, I mean, I'll throw some little stats around, but after COVID is kind of completed, the Premier is wanting to approve up to 2 million new people coming into the area, just into New South Wales alone. So there's a lot of immigration coming through to this area. And so the state planning department, they go off to the various different councils in around those particular areas, and they have to get the buy-in from those councils to how many new dwellings each one of those councils can actually contribute to give you that particular number so that they can house everybody. So in New South Wales, it's 2 million people, they're saying, in the next 5 years, 5 to 10 years, that they'll be letting in. Where do we house them? Where I am in Bondi or in Tamarama, there's no more sites. There's no more land. It's too expensive already. There's no parking. There's just nowhere for anybody to go. And the local councils, which covers kind of the Bondi area, is Waverley Council, which would be one of the smaller councils in amongst Sydney per se. But even them, they've signed up to finding 1,500 new dwellings within that 5-year period. Willara is 500, Randwick is 3,000, and so on and so forth. And each one of these councils are having to find new dwellings for these new people. So what my suggestion is that instead of knocking down these beautiful old buildings and even 3 or 4 of them in a row and then putting up this big monster apartment block, is that we use the existing infrastructure. The apartment blocks are already there, the ones that are screaming out for money and finance to be fixed up, and use them as and add a small bulk and scale to their rooftop, opposed to basically losing the characteristics of the area.
And realistically, and this is a construction and building question more than anything else, like how many additional apartments can you put on top?
It ranges very depending on what zone they're in. So if you're in an R2 zone, that's low density, you can only really have houses and the likes in that area. R3 is medium density, so that's where you can actually have flat buildings. You can actually have strata and the like. So anything R3 and above, you can actually add additional lots to a building. And there's height restrictions to what you can do in those particular zones. So maybe in an R3 zone, it could be 9.5 meters as high as you can go, or it could be 12.5 or 15, 25. It depends how close you are generally to the CBD and obviously the main areas. So you are restricted in what you can build, obviously, into the roof space. But the point is, when you buy in that particular roof space, like futures, or when you buy something in the future, it's that development space is A, what can you do with it now? But B, in 10, 20, 30, 40 years time, what do you think you'll be able to do with that particular space? So you're assuming that in the next 20, 30, 40 years, everything's going to have to go up. I mean, you imagine Manhattan was never like a flat town. It progressively gets higher. So it's looking at what the present value of that space is, but also the potential future value. So you're buying potential value moving forward, like a Bitcoin. You don't know what its value going to be, but in 5, 10 years time, it could be higher than it is today, even though you haven't built anything yet.
So it sounds like it's mainly, if the area and it's zoned for 12 meters, but say it's zoned for 24 meters, right? I'm just talking sort of double, and the current building's 12 meters. Theoretically, almost like a Lego block, could you just go punk, punk, another 4 levels, 4 stories of unit?
Yeah, look, I mean, if the building can take the additional load, yes. Traditionally, along the coastline here, where the salt air has been corroding the brick ties and the likes, the buildings can't actually handle huge amounts of weight. Those ones are generally, you are maybe able to get 2 additional apartments or 4 additional apartments because they're lightweight construction. But some of the other ones where you said the 12, could you go up to 24? More than likely, you'd have to knock the whole building down and rebuild, just so that it's strong enough in order to hold the extra 60 to 80 tons of brickwork.
Yeah, I can imagine the structural engineer having a fit about putting on half a new building on top of an old one. And I love the idea of, and I've seen this particularly in Melbourne, where we talk about lightweight construction, like prefab construction, just being craned into buildings and creating these new spaces, which can be quite interesting when you've got sort of an older red brick, which has quite a historic look to it, and then a quite contemporary little sort of almost a head on top, which is quite cool. So let's talk a little bit like how do people finance something like this?
So we ultimately, like a buyer's agent, we meet or introduce investors to strata owners. So what generally happens, when people come along and they buy their apartment, they borrow as much as they can in order to get the best place they can, and then sadly come along and a lot of people don't actually put any money aside should the building need to and require any works to it. So people do get themselves into a bind. There could be a special levy coming through in order to fix up the concrete cancer. But what options they do have is the individual owners can obviously pay in straight away for that particular work that needs to be done. B, they can get something called a strata loan, which is where the owner's corporation actually take out a loan based on the apartment values, and they can borrow up to 25% of the value of the apartment block and spend that money in fixing it up. Or the third option is what I'm suggesting, is that we get the $2 million, up to $2 million from an investor. And that amount of money ultimately, it kind of sits on the side. So what basically happens is I would find, or we would find, or others would find an apartment block that potentially could build up into the roof. We would then go into council with a particular plan and put a DA in for that attic conversion or that penthouse. And if and when the council have approved that, and actually that space has been approved to build, that's when the investor comes along and actually pays that $1 to $2 million for that roof space, only once that space has been approved by council. So it's a nil transaction until that approvals have been received.
Yeah.
And then once
and
they've done that.
Sorry, the question I had was around, so the $2 million would be for the airspace, I'm assuming, or does that include the construction costs as well?
No, that's just the airspace. So it's really up to the investor what they're going to be doing with that particular space. We've gone to council and we said we're putting up there 2 bedrooms and a bathroom and a balcony and the lights. But how, if the investor wanted to come through and put marble throughout and all these beautiful floorboards and skylights, that's really to their own expense. That's whatever they're wanting to do. But the outside envelope of the building has been approved by council and the owners prior to commencement.
Okay, fantastic. And are there specific sort of builders that build in that fashion, or are we talking about any builder sends out, their chippy to sort of go, okay, put a few walls up here? I'm thinking that the mechanics of building over a building's a bit different.
Yes, absolutely. Look, I mean, the trick is that you are dealing with multiple owners. You're dealing with common area space. So there are various different guidelines that you have to do in order to fund that, sign the contracts. Home warranty insurances are slightly different. But look, what generally happens is when you upscale a building, all the owners, or some of them, may use that time to actually do a fit out of their individual unit at the same time. So I'd say majority of the developments that I've done, say it's a block of 8, maybe 5 or 6 of them may decide to do their new plumbing, kitchens, bathrooms at the same time. So you're needing builders that can obviously manage the one budget on all the externals, common area space, but then have individual budgets that they can charge individual contracts to individual owners to do the individual fit outs. So it just becomes complicated. It's not a straightforward job when you've got 6 different owners wanting different bathrooms and kitchens and the like. So it's definitely worth finding the right one, and you stick to your favorite builders. And I generally use 3 at this time. Okay,
fantastic. And so where what sort of next steps for Buy Airspace? What are you looking for? People whoever's listening, and if you're living in an old apartment, what are the things that they probably need to consider to see if their apartment may suit what you're doing?
Well, look, myself and any town planner has access to the planning website for that particular council, and just by punching in their particular address, we know what zone they are, what their height requirements are, what their floor space ratio is. So it's quite easy to kind of determine from just a Google look at it, as well as the planning permissions, if there's any potential there. Hypothetically speaking, if you're looking at a 4-story apartment, you're guessing that each story is about 3 to 3.5 meters each, and you guess each level is times that by 4. That's 12 point something odd meters plus a roof. So you can guess where they are, if there's even going to be any option. But primarily anyone that's in there is to look around, see what neighbors are doing. Generally, if your neighbor's done something, you can do it yourself. But it's really designed around apartment owners that just don't have the funds in order to repair or fix or maintain their building. They're looking for funds somewhere else to fund it. And the best way to do that is by introducing another owner who ultimately invests in that particular block. But really, the point that I'm most passionate about is kind of where we're going to be living in the future. So climate change, where we got hyperinflation, we're in this point where we're all wanting to make a difference to the world. But this is a way of actually doing it and actually making some money along the side. So, the initiatives that we are pushing for owners is things like installing solar panels that charge Tesla batteries. So all the common area space lighting and the likes is all done by solar power, ultimately. And then installing rainwater tanks into the areas of that particular unit so that people are reusing the water that hits the roof area. And they obviously can do that beyond there. Filtration systems, doing fire upgrades, that obviously will be a much safer environment. Upgrading the communal space so there's outdoor workspaces. We've all been looking for workspaces during COVID and not having any fresh air or light or anything to that description, but the buildings have it. You can actually get them and do them. Sharing internet hubs. So where a block of 8 would have 8 different Telstra wireless hubs, their building actually really only needs one. So it's just trying to find common space that everyone's being able to use together. Creating vertical gardens, fitness areas that are connected to Tesla batteries, communal plug-in car and bike charging areas, communal shopping and delivery areys, parking stackers and recharging areas for all these electric cars that supposedly we're all buying. Upgrading the space, share bicycle areas. We're doing recycle stations, intelligent lighting windows and skylights, natural drying areas, heating and cooling systems that are combined and bolt-on external lifts for easy access for people that are getting older. So there's a sustainability part of this, and that $1 to $2 million can really help bring us into upgrading the building to become more self-sufficient.
Yeah, and Warren, I think that's fantastic that they're looking to add these extra things to buildings that a lot of us are looking at going, we just have to run it over. We just have to demolish it and start again, dig down, go up. Would love to hear a bit of a case study of some, maybe one or two of your favorite projects, and so that we can get an idea of how this comes, how this has come together, some numbers behind it, so it gives people a concept of how much of an uplift, construction, that sort of thing. And I'll feel free to pull up your website as well if you feel that you need to share anything on there.
That's okay. I can rattle off a few numbers. Look, I mean, the basic facts of anywhere along the eastern suburbs and other parts of the, wherever one, where people are generally wanting to live opposed to going further out. You're looking at a square meterage rate of about $20,000 to $35,000 a square meter, and that's of a completed apartment type, habitable space along the eastern suburbs that would have views, lights, and the like. So when you've got a roof space that's above you, hypothetically, and you have an 80 square meter apartment and there's an 80 square meter block at top and above you, ultimately, by the time you add that space onto your individual title, now your apartment is worth it's 160 square meters of space. Yes, maybe you haven't gone up and built it yet. But so what I do suggest to most of my clients is actually at the very least do the planning. Speak to the other owners, speak to council, get the contracts in place and the bylaws in place in order to do the construction. But you don't even need to do it. Like 70% of the profit that you make from a development going up into the roof is made purely in the planning stage. And it's the cheapest part as well of the development, because you're just planning for it. You're not actually doing any of the construction.
Mm.
You don't have any of the building costs or the maintenance or materials. You're purely just doing all the paperwork. And if you have that space on your title and it's approved, you can sell the dream to somebody else. Or if you want the other 30% of the build, you build it yourself with your neighbors. So I always suggest to people, at the very, very least, if you have an apartment in an apartment block and there's a whole bunch of unused space, at the very least, subdivide all that space and put it onto the individual owner's title, and you create value from nothing.
Yeah.
And you would know when you're looking at an estate, when you're speaking to an estate agent, if you've got an 80 square meter apartment and you have 80 square meters up in the roof that isn't yet developed, hypothetically, they sell it as a 160 square meter apartment. You know what I mean?
Oh,
And
is
you
that
could be
right?
looking.
Okay. Yep.
Well, yeah, it's on title. It's your space. So if you then go at 160 square meters, times that by $25,000 a square meter, you know, you're ultimately looking at $4 million for that particular apartment. And what they then do is just subtract whatever it would cost to build it, say $500,000. So therefore, the value add that you've got is a $3.5 million apartment. So they're selling the dream, the fact that you've got all the approvals from the owners that you've bought the space, as well as from council. So there's huge value, absolutely huge value, as you can imagine. When you're not having to fund money on making the foundations, it's already there. You're going up there, you're ultimately building wood with carpenters, and they can knock something up within 8 to 12 weeks. At the very least, you're not sitting there with that 1 year timeline in order for the construction. So it is a much quicker area, but generally it's very hard to access because these places are developed. You do have little Doris down there walking her dogs and you know, it's not an easy fit, but it's just finding the right ones that work.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's it. You know, it's really opened my eyes up to different opportunities now in that space, because again, I've been talking to the owners about and pulling them together. Like I said, getting 75% of people to agree to then go, either one, I'm going to sell my property to a developer, and there's always at least one or two that sort of go, no, I'm going to live in here till I die. And then the other one will be just sort of agreeing that I'm going to spend money when a lot of people don't have money to spend. So
Correct.
I think you're really addressing a solution to a problem which I don't think a lot of us have even thought about, which is really fantastic. And then to add to that, to sort of go, okay, well, here's the other value add to the rest of the building from a sustainability point of view, which I think is excellent. Well done on that.
I think the sustainability is definitely where we need to go in this way. I think it also we can keep the characteristic of these particular suburbs. We're not having to put up these high rises, increase parking and the likes to all these particular areas. We can use the existing infrastructure that's there, you know, and ultimately we are creating an additional owner to that particular space, but then we're using that money to fix up the building for another 100 years. So it does tick a lot of boxes in the fact that the end investor gets a top floor apartment. What they're wanting to do, it opens up how many developments across Australia. I mean, just in the Waverley area, there's 2,200 buildings that potentially have rooftops that are strata that could potentially go up. Yes, okay, not all of them can yet. In 2021, but 2025, 2030, when they start relaxing the laws in order to get these 2 million people into New South Wales. And as we all know, when they get people in, they want everyone to stay by the trains, by the schools, by the hospitals. You know, they want everyone concentrated in that particular space. So there are ways, obviously, to try and get people to be more concentrated, special areas.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
I think it will be something. It's very big in, as we spoke about earlier. It's really big in the UK. It's really
Mm.
big in Europe. It's really big in the States. It's just not yet done here.
Yes.
And I think it will. The more that we're needing to find more development sites to house everybody.
Absolutely. And developers are finding it increasingly difficult to find viable sites because I mean, if you're
Yeah.
talking about particularly in the eastern suburbs, I mean, even in these older apartments, they're not cheap, and so it's
No.
difficult to get them to stack up when you're having to buy these properties from the owners who have probably done renovations inside as well. It's just that the outside needs a bit of refreshing as well. So, um,
Yeah. Exactly.
excellent. Warren, where can people find you in terms of how can they reach out to you? I'll share your website as well, buyairspace.com.au. Great name. Um, and are you also speaking to investors that are keen and interested in purchasing?
That seems to be the easier side of it. There's plenty of investors wanting to get top floor apartments with views.
Mm,
The trick is finding the apartments and educating owners that there is this potential. It's a gold
yes.
mine if they know and aware of it.
Yeah.
We looking through realestate.com and domain, sitting through auctions to try and find that place to live, like everybody else is. But if you're a
Mm,
savvy investor and you can find an apartment block that has this beautiful rooftop that needs money to be spent on it, then go door knocking, go and speak to the
yes.
owners, go and speak to them, find out what's actually happening. And I think
Mm,
this is what's going to happen moving forward, is where everyone's quite used to knocking on to an individual house or a semi and say,
mm,
"Hi, are you willing to
mm,
sell?" I think what
mm,
will happen is that people will start knocking on strata doors. I know I do and have done for the last 15 years, saying,
mm,
"Hey guys, what are you doing with all that space?" And that's
mm,
traditionally 95% of where I've got all my work is word of mouth. It's literally talking to people, educating them of that particular opportunity, and that yes,
mm,
strata does allow you to add additional owners very easily.
mm,
Um, and that is it can be a long hard road, but if you find a building that requires the money, and some people are having to even sell up because they can't afford to fix up the building, this is a way that they can actually stay in their apartment as well
yeah.
as fix it up, make it sustainable, and potentially share whatever profits are remaining. So the beauty of it is, if you're an apartment owner and you have the apartment in your own name, and there's $500,000 left after spending, a million and a half on the building, that actually just gets distributed to the owners straight into your bank account and it's tax free. There's
Mm,
no income being paid on that. It's if though
mm,
you're selling your apartment, and as we know, you don't. If it's in your primary name, you don't need to worry.
yeah.
So yes, it's a way of where people were thinking, oh my God, I'm going to have to find all this money to fix up this building, and
Mm, mm,
it's a nightmare, to actually being the opposite way around of actually we've fixed up this building, we've become sustainable, and we've just made $200,000 in profit, which is better than their
yeah.
corporate job.
Yeah. Yeah.
It does and can work. To find me, yes, just buyairspace.com.au. I
And
offer a 1.75% for any leads to any strata blocks that would be looking at potentially selling their roof space. And
mm,
that's very similar to a buyer's agent. So where someone comes along and that space actually transacts, then everybody should be able to make from that as well. Do you know
to
what I mean?
benefit.
There's enough
Yeah.
in the kitty that everyone can do something well from it.
I'm thinking any strata managers that are listening as well, um, who would be interested to talk to you about this, 'cause I'm sure lots of strata managers dealing with all brick apartments. There might be an opportunity there as well.
Yeah. No, I'd be happy to help.
Excellent, excellent. It's
Absolutely.
been it's absolutely fascinating, and I'm really interested to learn more about it. Thank you so much, Warren, for sharing. It's been fantastic, and I wish you well. I think it's going to be a real game changer what it is that you're doing as more and more people get wind of what you're doing and see the opportunities from a development point of view. I
Yeah.
love that we're giving people this idea of going, hey, let's look at something else that's actually already there.
Yeah,
Mm.
exactly.
And
Um,
renovation going up or down or sideways.
and the funny thing is that Australia has all of the roofs are that A-frame, right?
Yeah,
And the
yeah.
funniest thing is we don't have any snow along the coastline.
Mm,
So the reason
mm,
why you'd have an A-frame type of roof is so that the snow would fit on it and would slide off in Europe. But
yeah.
here in Australia, we only really need flat roofs or to a
Mm,
slight degree so that water
mm,
can run off. So there's all
mm,
this dead space that's been
mm,
created for no apparent reason. I mean, obviously, it's
mm.
what everyone has done and it does make sense, but it's literally, you could cut the whole roof off and redesign it without
Yeah.
any major structural issues to the foundations.
Yeah, absolutely. So anyone that's interested, reach out to Warren. He's also on Facebook at Warren at buyairspace.com.au. Thank you so much for sharing, Warren. Absolutely fascinating. I love.
But
I'm a big fan. So, all good. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. And make sure you visit and subscribe to our YouTube channel if you're keen to find out more about our past business of property videos and you found value in our show, we'd appreciate if you'd subscribe to the channel and don't forget to hit the like button. So till next week, take care, goodbye, and see you guys on the business of property next week. Bye bye.